As Grandma used to say, when wild things come calling, they're bringing more than just themselves to your door. I should have remembered those words when I heard the scratching at dawn, should have known it wasn't just any animal making that desperate sound against my cabin door, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I opened it. There she stood, the bobcat I'd been feeding through the Montana winter, but she wasn't alone. At her feet lay something that made my blood run cold, a tiny, broken form no bigger than my fist. Her baby, barely breathing, blood pooling beneath its twisted hind leg, forming a perfect crimson triangle on my grandmother's old porch boards. The mother looked at me with those amber eyes, and I swear I heard my grandmother's voice whisper through the wind, "The time has come, child." But what terrified me most wasn't the blood. It was the way she looked at me, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, I'd been Grace Whitehawk, divorced, bitter, and running from everything that made me who I was supposed to be. My grandmother Sarah had been gone a year, taking with her 40 years of stories I'd dismissed as old native folklore, stories about bobcats and covenants and sacred responsibilities I was too educated, too modern, too stubborn to believe. The cabin felt like a mausoleum those first weeks. Every corner held memories of Grandma's voice telling tales I'd rolled my eyes at. Our family's been guardians for 7 generations. Gracie, she'd say, polishing that old silver necklace she never took off. When the time comes, you'll know. I'd nod politely while planning my escape back to the city, back to my marketing job, back to my safe, predictable world where animals stayed in zoos and miracles happened only in movies. But divorce has a way of stripping you down to bare bone. Michael had made it clear, choose him or choose all that Indian nonsense, as he called it. So here I was, 45 years old, starting over in a cabin that smelled like sage and wood smoke and disappointment. That's when I found Grandma's secret journal, hidden behind loose floorboards like some pirate treasure. Page after page of entries about something called the Covenant. Detailed accounts of rescuing bobcats, of mysterious connections spanning decades. Her handwriting grew shakier toward the end. Grace doesn't believe. God help us all if she doesn't remember in time. The first time I saw the bobcat, I was nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and feeling sorry for myself. She emerged from the pine grove like something out of Grandma's stories. Tawny coat, black tufted ears, amber eyes that seemed to look right through me. But it was the scar on her right ear that made my breath catch. A distinctive notch that looked exactly like the drawing in Grandma's journal. "Luna?" I whispered, the name appearing in my mind like it had always been there. She tilted her head at the sound, and for one crazy moment, I could have sworn she nodded. That's when I started leaving food. Just scraps at first, leftover chicken, canned tuna, telling myself it was simple kindness, nothing more. But every morning when I found the empty plate, I felt something stirring in my chest, something that felt dangerously like purpose. "You're losing your mind, Grace," I told myself. But Luna kept coming, and I kept feeding her, and slowly, carefully, we began to trust each other. I should have known she was preparing me for something bigger. My hand shook as I dialed Dr. James Running Bear's number, Luna's desperate amber eyes burning into my memory. The tiny bobcat kit lay wrapped in my grandmother's quilt, so still I had to watch for the shallow rise and fall of his chest to know he was alive. Jim, it's Grace Whitehawk. I need you to come to my cabin. Now. A pause. Grace, it's 6 in the morning. What's wrong? A bobcat brought me her injured baby. Jim, she literally brought him to my door. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, his voice came back, careful and measured. Grace, federal law forbids keeping wild bobcats. I could lose my license. We need to call Fish and Wildlife. No. The word came out harder than I intended. Jim, my grandmother always said, laws are written by men, but covenants are written by the Creator. This is bigger than federal regulations. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, weighing his options. Doctor? Running Bear had known my grandmother, had grown up hearing the same stories I'd rejected. How bad is the injury? His back leg is twisted. There's blood. And Jim? I swallowed hard. The mother won't leave. She's sitting right outside my door like she's waiting for something. Christ Almighty. I heard rustling in the background, the sound of someone getting dressed quickly. Grace, if we do this, we do it off the books. Complete secrecy. And if anyone asks, this conversation never happened. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Bring the kit to my clinic. Back entrance. And Grace, be careful. Mother bobcats don't usually. The line went dead. My phone buzzed with a text from my ex-husband Michael. Heard from Jim Thompson you've got some kind of wild animal. Grace, people are talking. You're becoming like your crazy grandmother. I stared at the message, anger rising in my chest like a fever. Michael had never understood, never even tried. I typed back, maybe crazy is just another word for seeing what others choose to ignore. The drive to Dr. Running Bear's clinic normally took 20 minutes. I made it in 12. The tiny bobcat kit secured in a pet carrier beside me. Luna following my truck through the forest like a ghost. Every few minutes, I'd check the carrier. The kit had stopped shivering, which somehow seemed worse than when he'd been trembling. Stay with me, little one, I whispered. Your mama trusted me with you. Don't make me break my promise to her. Halfway there, my phone rang. Michael again. Grace, I'm coming up there. This has gone too far. Don't you dare. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. This is none of your business anymore. You're my wife, ex-wife, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Doing what? Playing Snow White with wild animals. Grace, you're a marketing executive, not some medicine woman from your grandmother's fairy tales. The kit made a tiny mewing sound, so faint I almost missed it, but it was there. Life, fighting to stay. Michael, I have to go. Grace, wait. I hung up and turned off the phone. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat. Luna's paws padding alongside the truck, and something else. A voice that sounded like my grandmother's, carried on the morning wind. Child, you're finally coming home. At the clinic, Dr. Running Bear was waiting by the back door, medical bag in hand. His long gray hair was hastily pulled back, and his usually calm demeanor seemed strained. Let me see him. I opened the carrier with trembling fingers. The kit was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Doctor? Running Bear lifted him gently, his experienced hands moving over the tiny body. Sweet Jesus. He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Grace, this isn't just any bobcat. Look at the markings. I leaned closer. Along the kit's right ear was a distinctive pattern of spots, forming an almost perfect crescent shape. I've seen this marking before, Dr. Running Bear said quietly. In your grandmother's records. The world seemed to tilt sideways. What are you talking about? Grace, this bobcat kit. His mother was one of the animals your grandmother saved. The records are all here. Patient named Luna, rescued 8 years ago by Sarah Whitehawk. Note in the file says, part of the covenant. I stared at him, my mind reeling. You mean Grandma wasn't imagining things? Your grandmother saved 17 bobcats over 40 years. Grace, this one was her last before she got too sick to continue. He looked down at the kit in his hands. And now Luna's brought her baby to you. Outside, I could hear Luna pacing, making soft, chittering sounds that somehow conveyed both anxiety and patience. She was waiting. She'd been waiting for this moment since the day my grandmother died. What does this mean? I asked. Dr. Running Bear met my eyes. It means you have a choice to make. I can try to save this kit, but if I do, you need to understand something. The covenant isn't just about saving one animal. Grace, it's about becoming a guardian for life. The kit's breathing hitched, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we'd lost him. Then it steadied again, fragile but persistent. As my daddy used to say. Dr. Running Bear continued, you can run from your calling, but eventually it'll come knocking on your door. I looked at the tiny creature fighting for life in his hands, thought about Luna waiting outside, about my grandmother's stories I'd spent years dismissing, about the choice between the safe, predictable world I'd known and something vast and terrifying and sacred. Save him, I said. Whatever it takes, save him. Dr. Running Bear nodded grimly. Then God help us both, because once we start down this path, there's no going back. As he carried the kit toward the operating room, Luna's call echoed through the morning air, wild, plaintive, and filled with a mother's desperate hope. 3 months earlier, on the night my grandmother Sarah Whitehawk drew her final breath, I sat beside her hospital bed, holding secrets I didn't yet understand. The morphine had made her words soft and wandering, but her grip on my hand remained fierce. Gracie, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady beep of machines. You think education made you too smart for the old ways, but wisdom isn't learned in universities. I squeezed her hand, guilt eating at me like acid. Grandma, you need to rest. No time for rest. Her amber eyes, so much like Luna's, fixed on mine with startling clarity. Those aren't just stories, child. The covenant is real. Our family has honored it for 7 generations. Grandma, please, listen. Her grip tightened with surprising strength. When I was 25, pregnant with your mother, a bobcat came to me, just like one will come to you. Her baby was dying, and somehow she knew that I could help. I'd heard variations of this story my entire childhood, always dismissed them as native folklore mixed with an old woman's imagination. But lying there in that sterile hospital room, with death hovering in the corners like smoke, her words carried a weight that made my chest tight. "I had to choose," she continued. "Save the bobcat's baby and risk losing my own, or turn away and let nature take its course. What did you do?" "What any mother would do. I saved them both." She reached for the silver necklace she'd worn every day of my life, her fingers trembling as she lifted it over her head. "This belonged to my grandmother, and her grandmother before that. When the time comes, she'll recognize it. Her grandmother knew mine." The necklace was beautiful in its simplicity, a crescent moon with intricate etchings that seemed to shift in the dim light. I'd admired it as a child, but never understood its significance. "Grandma, I can't—" "You can. You will." Her voice grew stronger, more urgent. "Because if you don't, the line ends with you. 7 generations of guardians. And it all stops because my granddaughter thinks she's too civilized for miracles." The accusation stung because it was true. I had thought myself above such things, college-educated, career-focused, married to a man who valued logic over legend. I'd spent years distancing myself from everything that made me Whitehawk, everything that connected me to this land and its stories. "The world's changing, Grandma. People don't believe in these things anymore. People believed in a lot of things before the world convinced them not to." Her eyes drifted to the window, where early snow was beginning to fall. "Your mother didn't believe either. Broke my heart when she left the reservation. Married that white man, moved to Denver. She thought she could run from who she was. I knew the story. My mother had died in a car accident when I was 12, leaving me to be raised by my grandmother on the reservation. But I'd never known about her rejection of family traditions. Is that why she left? Same reason you did. Child. Same reason you married Michael and tried to disappear into his world?" She turned back to me, and I saw tears in her eyes. "But running from yourself only works for so long. Eventually, you have to come home." The words hung between us like a challenge. I thought about my marriage, already cracking under the weight of Michael's demands that I choose between him and my heritage. I thought about my job in the city, marketing products I didn't care about to people who didn't need them. I thought about how empty it all felt, how disconnected I'd become from everything that once mattered. What if I'm not strong enough? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Strength isn't about being fearless, Gracie. It's about being afraid and choosing love anyway. She placed the necklace in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "This bobcat that's coming, her name is Luna. I saved her mother 8 years ago, just like my grandmother saved her grandmother's mother 40 years before that. It's a cycle, child, an unbroken circle of trust and responsibility. How can you be so sure she'll come to me? Because they remember, not in their minds, maybe, but in their blood, in their souls, the same way you'll remember when the time comes." She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "You think it's coincidence that you're getting divorced right now, that you're being pulled back to the cabin. The universe has a way of preparing us for our purpose, even when we're fighting against it." The monitors began beeping faster, and I could see her energy fading. But she held on, her grip on my hand never loosening. "There's something else," Her voice was getting weaker. In my journal, hidden under the floorboards by the fireplace. Everything's there, the history, the records, the instructions. But Gracie, she struggled to focus on me. Some things can't be written down. Some things you have to feel. I don't understand. You will? Her breathing became more labored. When Luna looks into your eyes, you'll understand everything. The fear, the trust, the desperate love that drives a mother to risk everything for her child. And in that moment, you'll have to choose who you really are. The next morning, she was gone. The funeral was small reservation families who remembered her work with animals, a few old friends from town, Michael looking uncomfortable in his city suit. As we lowered her casket into the earth, a sound echoed across the cemetery that made everyone look up. Bobcat calls, coming from the forest that bordered the graveyard. Not one, but several, as if they'd come to say goodbye. Michael had grabbed my arm then, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Grace, we need to go. This is getting weird." But I'd stayed, listening to the wild songs until they faded into silence. And for the first time since arriving back on the reservation, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. That night, alone in the cabin for the first time, I'd found the journal, page after page of my grandmother's careful handwriting, documenting decades of rescues, of connections between our family and the bobcat families we'd protected, names, dates, photographs, medical records, proof that it was all real, but it was the last entry that broke my heart. Grace doesn't believe. She thinks she's too educated for the old ways, too modern for magic. God help us all if she doesn't remember in time. Luna is carrying now. When her time comes, Grace will be our family's last hope. I'd closed the journal and wept then, for my grandmother's faith in me, for my own stubborn blindness, for all the years I'd wasted trying to be someone I wasn't. And now, 3 months later, with Luna's baby fighting for life in Dr. Running Bear's capable hands, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to tell me. Some callings don't wait for convenience. Some responsibilities choose us, whether we're ready or not. The necklace hung around my neck now, warm against my skin, connecting me to 7 generations of women who'd answered when wild things came calling. Women who'd understood that love transcends species, that family extends beyond blood, that some promises are too sacred to break. Standing in that clinic, listening to Luna pace outside, I whispered the words I should have said months ago. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm ready now. I'm finally ready to come home." Dr. Running Bear's hands trembled slightly as he pointed to the intricate scars along Luna's haunches, visible through the clinic window where she paced. "Grace, these aren't from accidents or fights. Look at the patterned surgical scars, healed with professional care." My world tilted. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this bobcat has been under medical care before. Extensive care." He walked to a filing cabinet, his movements deliberate and careful. "Grace, I need to show you something. But once I do, there's no going back to ignorance." He pulled out a thick manila folder, yellowed with age. The tab read, "Covenant Protocol, Sarah Whitehawk, Confidential." My grandmother's name in his handwriting, but dated 8 years ago. "You knew." The words came out as barely a whisper. All this time, you knew what Grandma was doing. I didn't just know. Grace, I was part of it." He opened the folder, revealing page after page of medical records, photographs, and detailed notes. "Your grandmother brought me into the Covenant when I was fresh out of veterinary school, taught me everything I know about treating wild bobcats." The first document made my knees weak. A medical chart for a female bobcat. Estimated age 2 years, with a photograph that was unmistakably Luna younger, thinner. But those same distinctive ear markings. Patient designation Luna, rescued by Sarah Whitehawk, October 15th, 2015. Injuries: compound fracture of right hind leg, severe malnutrition, infected wound on left flank. I read aloud, my voice shaking. Treatment successful. Note: patient shows unusual intelligence and trust toward humans. Recommend inclusion in Covenant protocol. Keep reading, Dr. Running Bear said gently. The next page contained my grandmother's handwriting. "Luna is special. She understands more than any bobcat I've worked with. I believe she's the one prophesied in the old stories, the bridge between our world and theirs. If something happens to me, she'll know to bring her offspring to Grace." Prophesied. I looked up at him, my mind reeling. "Jim, what exactly is the Covenant?" He sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "Grace, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. But your grandmother saved 17 bobcats over 4 decades. Not just saved, created a bond with them. A mutual protection agreement that spans generations. You're talking about animals. Jim, they don't make agreements, don't they?" He gestured toward the window where Luna continued her vigil. "That bobcat out there brought her dying baby to you specifically. Not to the Wildlife Center 30 miles away. Not to any of the other cabins in the area. To you. She somehow knew you were Sarah Whitehawk's granddaughter." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "How long has this been going on?" "In your family 7 generations, according to the records your grandmother kept." "But Grace, it's bigger than just your family." He pulled out another folder, this one even thicker. "There are 12 families across the northern Plains states, Lakota, Cheyenne, Blackfoot, all maintaining similar covenants with different species: wolves, eagles, bears, mountain lions. That's impossible. Is it your grandmother documented everything? Names, dates, bloodlines, both human and animal. She was meticulous about tracking which bobcat families connected with which human families. Luna's lineage goes back 4 generations to the first bobcat your great-great-grandmother saved." I stared at the genealogy charts he spread across the desk. 2 family trees, 1 human, 1 bobcat with connecting lines showing the relationships between them. My name was at the bottom of the human tree, and below it, in my grandmother's careful script, Grace Whitehawk, 7th generation guardian, status unconfirmed. What does unconfirmed mean? It means Luna's visit today was a test, Grace. If you'd turned her away, if you'd failed to help her baby, the covenant would have been broken. Your family's line as guardians would have ended. The weight of responsibility crashed over me like an avalanche. And if I succeed, then you take your grandmother's place as the regional coordinator for bobcat protection. You become responsible not just for Luna's family, but for 12 other bobcat clans across 3 counties. Through the window, Luna's pacing had stopped. She sat facing the clinic, her amber eyes fixed on the building where her baby fought for life. As if sensing my gaze, she turned to look directly at me through the glass. In that moment, I felt something pass between us, a recognition, an understanding that transcended species. "Jim," I said slowly, "how many people know about this?" "Officially none. The government would shut us down in a heartbeat if they knew we were maintaining active relationships with wild predators. Unofficially, there's a network of veterinarians, rangers, and tribal elders who help when called upon. And they all just believe. Grace, when you've seen what I've seen, animals seeking specific help from specific people, wild creatures making choices that defy every scientific understanding of animal behavior, belief stops being a choice. It becomes a fact. A soft knock on the door interrupted us. Dr. Running Bear's assistant, Maria, peered in nervously. "Doctor, you need to come quickly. The Bobcat kit." We rushed to the operating room where the tiny patient lay motionless on the table, connected to monitors that showed a heartbeat so faint it was barely registering. Dr. Running Bear immediately began checking vital signs while I stood frozen in the doorway. "He's crashing," Dr. Running Bear said grimly. "Grace, I need you to assist me, now." "I don't know how." "Your grandmother did. The knowledge is in your blood." He looked at me with desperate urgency. "Place your hands here, on his chest. Feel for the heartbeat." I moved to the table on shaking legs, placing my palms on the kit's tiny ribcage. His fur was soft as silk, and beneath it I could feel the fragile flutter of a heart giving up. "What do I do? What your grandmother would do. What 7 generations of White Hawk women have done. You save him." Something shifted inside me then, as if a door I didn't know existed had suddenly opened. My hands grew warm, and I found myself humming a tune I didn't remember learning, something low and rhythmic that seemed to match the kit's fading heartbeat. "That's it," Dr. Running Bear whispered. "That's the healing song your grandmother used." The monitors began to stabilize, slowly, incredibly. The kit's breathing deepened. His heart rate strengthened. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, his eyes fluttered open, clear, bright, and aware. Dr. Running Bear stared at the monitors in amazement. "In 30 years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen anything like that." I looked down at the kit, who was now looking back at me with curiosity rather than fear. "What did I do? What you were born to do, Grace. What your family has done for generations." He smiled, tears in his eyes. "Welcome to the covenant." Outside, Luna's triumphant call echoed through the morning air, a sound of pure joy and relief that seemed to announce to the entire forest that her baby would live. As I gently stroked the kit's head, he made a soft purring sound and pressed closer to my hand. In that moment, I understood what my grandmother had tried to tell me. This wasn't about saving animals. This was about honoring the sacred connections that bind all living things together. "His name," I said suddenly. "We should call him Spirit." "Spirit," Dr. Running Bear repeated, nodding approval. "Yes, that's perfect." And as if he understood, the tiny bobcat that would change my life forever opened his mouth and gave the smallest, most determined mew I'd ever heard. The surgery to repair Spirit's shattered leg took 3 hours. 3 hours of me standing beside Dr. Running Bear, my hands somehow knowing exactly what to do, despite never having assisted in an operation before. 3 hours of Luna pacing outside the clinic, her calls growing more desperate as the day wore on. "Hand me the forceps," Dr. Running Bear murmured, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked to piece together bones no bigger than matchsticks. My hand moved before my mind could process the request, selecting the right instrument from the tray. It was as if some ancestral memory was guiding me, whispering instructions in a voice that sounded like my grandmother's. "Grace, you're doing this like you've done it 100 times before." "I feel like I have," I admitted, watching my hands move with confidence I didn't know I possessed. It's the strangest thing, like muscle memory for something I've never learned. Spirit lay motionless under the anesthesia, his tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. But twice during the operation, his heart stopped. Twice. I found myself placing my hands on his rib cage and humming that same healing song. And twice, his heart started beating again. "That's not medically possible," Dr. Running Bear said after the second incident, but his voice held awe rather than skepticism. "Hearts don't restart from touch and sound." "Maybe medicine doesn't know everything," I replied, the words coming from some deep place of certainty I didn't recognize. It was during the final delicate phase of the surgery that I felt a presence in the room that made my skin prickle. Not threatening, but powerful. Ancient. I looked up to see Luna pressed against the clinic window, her amber eyes fixed not on the operating table, but on me. And in that gaze, I saw something that stopped my breath. Recognition, not just of me as the woman who'd been feeding her, but deeper recognition, as if she was seeing past Grace, the marketing executive, past Grace, the bitter divorcee, straight through to something elemental and true. "She knows," I whispered. "Knows what she knows. I'm a White Hawk. She knows what that means." Dr. Running Bear paused in his suturing. "Grace, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maybe I had, because suddenly I could feel them 7 generations of women standing behind me, their hands guiding mine, their voices joining my humming. My great-great-grandmother who started it all, my great-grandmother who saved Luna's great-grandmother, my grandmother who saved Luna herself, all of them here, in this moment, helping me save Luna's son. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like coming home. "How much do you know about my family's history?" I asked as Dr. Running Bear finished the final sutures. "More than you might think. Your grandmother and I spent a lot of long nights talking while she recovered from her chemotherapy. She told me stories that would curl your hair." "Tell me one." He checked Spirit's vitals one more time, then settled into a chair beside the operating table. "Did you know your great-grandmother once walked 30 miles through a blizzard to save a bobcat caught in a trap? This was 1943, middle of winter. No roads. Just her and a pair of snowshoes." I shook my head, transfixed. "She found the bobcat nearly dead, its leg mangled by the steel jaws, carried it back to her cabin, nursed it for 3 months. When it finally healed enough to be released, it didn't leave. It stayed around her property. protecting her family. During the harsh winter of '44, when food was scarce, that bobcat would leave dead rabbits on her doorstep. "Payment," I breathed. "Exactly. But it gets better." That same bobcat your grandmother called her Grandmother Moon had cubs the following spring. And when those cubs grew up and had their own families, they remembered, for 40 years, there were always bobcats watching over your great-grandmother's land. Spirit stirred on the table, making a tiny mewing sound. Without thinking, I reached out and gently stroked his head. He quieted immediately, pressing into my touch. And my grandmother continued the tradition. Not just continued it, expanded it. Sarah was special. Grace. She had a gift for understanding animal behavior that went beyond anything I learned in veterinary school. She could predict when animals were in trouble, sometimes days before they actually showed up needing help. A chill ran down my spine. Is that what's happening to me? I don't know. But I'll tell you this. I've never seen anyone take to medical procedures the way you did today. It was like watching someone remember skills they'd temporarily forgotten. Through the window, Luna had stopped pacing. She sat in perfect stillness, her gaze alternating between Spirit and me. As our eyes met through the glass, she made a soft chuffing sound, the same sound I'd heard mother cats make to their kittens. "She's calling to me," I said, wonder in my voice. "Answer her." I moved to the window and placed my palm against the glass. Luna immediately pressed her nose to the same spot. Separated from my hand by only a few millimeters of glass, the warmth that spread through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a sense of connection so profound it brought tears to my eyes. "She's thanking me," I whispered, "for saving Spirit, for coming home, for finally accepting who I'm supposed to be." Dr. Running Bear smiled. "Your grandmother always said this day would come. She never doubted it, even when you were at your most resistant. How could she be so sure? Because she knew something you're just beginning to understand. The covenant isn't just about humans helping animals, Grace. It's about recognizing that we're all part of the same family. That the lines we draw between species are artificial constructs that mean nothing to the natural world." Spirit opened his eyes then, blinking slowly as the anesthesia wore off. His gaze found mine immediately, and in those bright amber eyes, so like his mother's, I saw intelligence and awareness that took my breath away. "Hello, little one," I murmured, offering him my finger. He sniffed it carefully, then gave it the tiniest lick with his rough pink tongue. "He's accepting you," Dr. Running Bear observed. "In bobcat culture, that's significant. Mother cats have to teach their young which humans are safe. Luna's already told him you're family." The word hit me like a revelation. Family. Not just the family I'd been born into, but the one I'd chosen. The one that chose me back. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you take him home. Not to release him, he's too young, and his injury will require weeks of rehabilitation. You're going to have to become his surrogate mother while Luna watches and learns to trust you completely." The magnitude of the responsibility should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a sense of rightness so complete it was like finding a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. I don't know the first thing about raising a bobcat, You know more than you think, and what you don't know, Luna will teach you. Bobcat mothers are very hands-on educators." He grinned. "Besides, you've got 7 generations of women who did this before you. Trust the knowledge in your blood." As if summoned by his words, my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do. The knowing is already inside you, child. It always has been." Spirit mewed again, a sound so small and trusting it broke my heart and mended it simultaneously. Outside, Luna stood and began walking toward the clinic door, her message clear. It was time to take her baby home. "Ready, doctor?" Running Bear asked, carefully lifting Spirit and placing him in a specially designed carrier. I looked at the tiny bobcat, who had already changed my life in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Then at his mother waiting patiently outside. Then at my own hands that had somehow known how to save a life. As my grandmother used to say, ready or not, some gifts choose their own timing. I picked up the carrier, feeling Spirit's weight so light, yet somehow containing the weight of 7 generations of trust. Let's go home. 40 years earlier, my grandmother, Sarah Whitehawk, stood in this same cabin kitchen, 25 years old and 8 months pregnant, facing an impossible choice. I knew this because I'd found her private journal, the one hidden deeper than the others, wrapped in oilcloth and buried beneath the floorboards like a secret too precious for daylight. The entry was dated December 23rd, 1983. She came to me in the blizzard, just like Mother said she would. Not Luna, but her grandmother, the matriarch of the bloodline. Dying, carrying cubs that would freeze without intervention. Thomas begged me not to get involved. Think of our baby, Sarah. Think of our family. But this is about family. All of it. I sat in Grandma's old rocking chair, Spirit sleeping peacefully in my lap while Luna watched from the window and read the words that would haunt me forever. The storm has been raging for 3 days. No way to get to town, no way to call for help. The bobcat grandmother moon. I've named her as dying of internal bleeding from a hunter's trap. Her cubs are premature, barely alive, but they might survive if I can save her long enough for them to nurse. But the stress is triggering my own labor. Dr. Henderson warned me about stress, warned me that trauma could cause complications with my pregnancy. My hands shook as I turned the page. Thomas found me in the barn, trying to perform surgery on Grandmother Moon while my contractions grew stronger. He was furious. Choose, Sarah. Choose right now, our baby or that animal. I won't lose my wife and child for some goddamn cat. The pain was so bad I could barely see straight. But I looked into Grandmother Moon's eyes and saw what I've seen in every creature I've helped, the desperate love of a mother who would do anything to save her babies. The next passage was written in shakier handwriting. I told Thomas to get the medical supplies from the house. If he wouldn't help me save her, he could at least help me try to save myself afterward. The look on his face like I'd chosen madness over sanity, death over life. But some things are bigger than personal safety. Some promises transcend the boundaries of species. I could barely breathe as I read what came next. Grandmother Moon must have understood what was happening. As my labor intensified, she did something I've never seen in 40 years of animal rescue. She got up from the operating table despite her injuries, despite her weakening condition, and positioned herself beside me. Every time a contraction hit, she would press her head against my hand and purr. That low, rumbling vibration seemed to ease the pain, seemed to give me strength. Luna's soft chirping from the window brought me back to the present. She was calling to Spirit, who stirred in my lap and made tiny answering sounds. The conversation between mother and child was unmistakable. Even across species lines, I continued reading. The birth was harder than it should have been. Something was wrong, the baby wasn't coming, and I was losing too much blood. Thomas was screaming at me to let the bobcat die, to focus on saving myself and our child. But Grandmother Moon seemed to sense the crisis. She began making sounds I'd never heard before, deep, rhythmic calls that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. The journal entry grew more difficult to read, the handwriting increasingly erratic. I don't know how to explain what happened next. As Grandmother Moon called, I felt something shift inside me, not just physically, but spiritually, like she was sharing her strength with me, lending me her wild courage. The baby came suddenly, easily, like the path had been cleared, a perfect daughter, crying lustily, healthy despite everything. I looked down at Spirit, marveling at how this tiny creature carried the blood of the bobcat who had helped bring my mother into the world. But Grandmother Moon paid the price for her gift. The effort of helping me through my labor exhausted what little strength she had left. She lived just long enough to see her cubs nurse, just long enough to touch her nose to my daughter's tiny hand. Thomas later said it was coincidence, that animals can't consciously choose to help during human childbirth. But I know better. She gave her life to save mine and my babies. She chose to trust a human with the most precious thing she had. The next entry was dated 3 days later. Buried Grandmother Moon on the hill behind the cabin, overlooking the valley where her family has lived for generations. Her cubs survived. But they'll need human care for at least 8 weeks. Thomas thinks I've lost my mind, that grief and hormones have made me irrational. He doesn't understand that this isn't about sanity or irrationality. This is about honoring a debt that can never be repaid. I turned to find an entry from several months later. The cubs are thriving. Name them Dawn and Shadow. Dawn for her golden coat, Shadow for the dark markings around her eyes. They've bonded with the baby, treating her like a litter mate. Sometimes I find them all sleeping together in the crib, 3 babies keeping each other warm. Thomas has stopped arguing, stopped trying to make me see reason. I think watching them together has changed something in him too. But the next entry shattered my heart. Thomas left today, took the baby, said he won't raise his daughter in a house where wild animals are family members, said I have to choose between my obsession and my real family. I tried to explain that they're all real family, that the covenant doesn't diminish human love but expands it. But he couldn't see past his fear. I had to stop reading. My mother had been taken from the reservation as an infant, raised by my grandfather in Denver, told that her mother was dead. She'd only learned the truth when she was 18, only returned to meet Sarah when she was already pregnant with me. The final entry in this section was devastating. I chose to honor the covenant, and it cost me my daughter. But I pray that someday she'll understand, that someday she'll come home and see that love multiplied is never love diminished, that the family I built with Dawn and Shadow doesn't replace the family I lost. It proves that family is bigger than blood, stronger than species, more enduring than fear. Luna's chirping grew more insistent. She was standing at the window now, her attention focused on something in the distance. Following her gaze, I saw headlights winding up the mountain road toward my cabin. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Coming up to talk sense into you. This has gone far enough." I closed the journal and held Spirit closer. Outside, Luna had begun pacing again, her protective instincts triggered by the approaching vehicle. She knew, somehow, that this visitor posed a threat to her family's sanctuary. "It's okay, girl," I whispered to her through the glass. "I made my choice today. I'm not going to let anyone take it away." But as Michael's headlights grew brighter, casting harsh shadows through the peaceful cabin, I realized that choosing the covenant was only the beginning. Now, I had to fight for it. The truck pulled into my driveway, doors slamming, voices carrying on the night air. Michael wasn't alone. I recognized the second voice, his brother Dave, a game warden who'd never hidden his disdain for what he called Indian nonsense. "Grace." Michael's voice boomed across the yard. "We need to talk. Now." Luna's response was immediate and primal, a warning call that raised every hair on my arms. Spirit woke with a start, his tiny claws digging into my shirt as he sensed the danger. Through the window, I watched Luna position herself between the cabin and the approaching men, her body language screaming territorial defense. She was protecting us, protecting her son and the woman who'd saved him. As my ex-husband and his brother marched toward my door, I thought about my grandmother's words. Some promises transcend the boundaries of species. Tonight, I would learn just how far I was willing to go to keep that promise. The knock on my door, when it came, was aggressive and demanding, but I didn't move. I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair, holding Spirit, watching Luna stand guard, and felt the strength of 7 generations of White Hawk women flowing through my veins. "Ready or not," I whispered, echoing my grandmother's words. "Some gifts choose their own timing, and some battles," I was learning, choose their own moment to begin. The pounding on my door echoed through the cabin like gunshots. Michael's voice cut through the night air, sharp with authority and frustration. "Grace, open this door right now. We know what you're doing in there." I remained seated in my grandmother's rocking chair, Spirit curled against my chest, his tiny heartbeat rapid against my palm. Through the window, Luna had positioned herself directly between the cabin and the 2 men, her body low and tense, ready to defend what she considered her territory. "Grace, don't make this harder than it has to be." Dave's voice joined his brother's. "I'm here in an official capacity. We've had reports of illegal wildlife possession." The words hit me like a slap. Someone had called them. Someone had reported me for saving Spirit's life. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Running Bear. "Grace, Martha Whitfield called Fish and Wildlife. Claims you're keeping dangerous predators. Be careful." Martha Whitfield, my busybody neighbor who'd made it clear she disapproved of my Indian nonsense since the day I'd moved back to the cabin. The woman who'd cornered me at the grocery store 2 weeks ago, her voice dripping with false concern. "Grace, dear, people are worried about you. Living alone, talking to wild animals. It's not natural." I'd tried to explain that I was simply feeding a hungry bobcat, nothing more. But Martha's eyes had narrowed with the kind of prejudice I'd encountered my whole life, the assumption that native traditions were somehow primitive, dangerous, wrong. Now she'd weaponized that prejudice, turned it into an official complaint that could destroy everything. "Grace," Michael called again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I brought Dave here to help you, to get you the psychological evaluation you need. This obsession with wild animals isn't healthy. It's not safe." Psychological evaluation. The words twisted in my stomach like a knife. They thought I was crazy, just like they'd thought my grandmother was crazy. Just like every generation of White Hawk women had been labeled crazy for honoring connections that others couldn't understand. Spirit stirred in my arms, making a tiny mewing sound that seemed to cut straight through the tension. Outside, Luna responded with a soft chirp of reassurance. Mother and child, communicating across the barriers humans had tried to impose between wild and domestic, between us and them. I stood slowly, moving to the window where Luna waited. Our eyes met through the glass, and in that moment, I saw something that shook me to my core, not just intelligence, but understanding. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew these men posed a threat not just to her in spirit, but to the sacred bond we'd formed. "Dave," I called through the door, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my throat. "You're trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave." "Can't do that, Grace. I've got a warrant here to search for illegally possessed wildlife. We know you've got at least one bobcat in there, possibly more." A warrant. They'd moved fast, probably called in favors, used the old boys' network that had been oppressing my people for generations. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They thought I was the same broken woman who'd fled to the city 10 years ago, who'd tried to disappear into Michael's safe, white world. They didn't know I'd come home in every sense of the word. "Michael," I said, pressing my palm against the door, "do you remember what you said when we got married? That you loved all of me, even the parts you didn't understand?" A pause. "Grace, that was different. This is about your safety. About control." The words came out harder than I'd intended. "About making me small enough to fit into your world. But I'm done being small. Michael, I'm done apologizing for who I am." Who you are is a marketing executive from Denver, not some mystical animal whisperer, Grace. Listen to yourself. You're talking like your grandmother with all her crazy stories about animal spirits and ancient covenants. The dismissal in his voice, the casual way he brushed aside generations of sacred tradition, lit a fire in my chest that I hadn't felt since I was a child defending my heritage on the playground. Those weren't stories, Michael. They were truth. And the fact that you can't see the difference is exactly why we could never work. I heard him say something to Dave, too low for me to catch. Then Dave's official voice, "Grace White Hawk, I'm ordering you to open this door and surrender any wildlife in your possession. Failure to comply will result in forced entry and additional charges." Through the window, I saw Luna's muscles bunch. She was preparing to run not away, but toward the threat. She was going to defend Spirit and me the only way she knew how. "No, girl," I whispered. knowing somehow that she could hear me. "Not like that. Trust me." I moved to my grandmother's desk and pulled out the thick folder Dr. Running Bear had given me earlier, the official covenant documentation, birth certificates, medical records, photographs spanning 40 years. Proof that what we did wasn't random, wasn't crazy, wasn't the delusion of an unbalanced mind. "Dave," I called, my voice carrying the authority of 7 generations of women who'd fought similar battles. "Before you break down that door, you might want to know that Dr. James Running Bear is on his way here with a federal wildlife biologist. This Bobcat kit is under official medical supervision as part of a legitimate rehabilitation program." It was a bluff, but not entirely. Dr. Running Bear had mentioned contacts in the federal system. People who understood that sometimes the best wildlife conservation happened outside official channels. "Bullshit," Dave shot back. "There's no record of any rehabilitation permit for this property. Check your facts." "Dave, the Endangered Species Act provides specific exemptions for Native American wildlife protection practices on tribal lands. This cabin sits on treaty-recognized Blackfoot territory." I wasn't entirely sure that was true, but it sounded official enough to give them pause. More importantly, it bought me time to figure out my next move. Spirit had fallen asleep again, his tiny body warm and trusting against my chest. Such a small creature to carry such enormous significance. But as I looked down at him, I realized that this moment wasn't really about Spirit at all. It was about every Native woman who'd ever been told her traditions were primitive, her connections to the natural world were imaginary, her way of life was wrong. It was about my great-great-grandmother who'd walked 30 miles through a blizzard to save a trapped bobcat. About my grandmother who'd chosen to honor the covenant even when it cost her everything. About my mother, who died before she could fully reclaim her heritage. It was about me, finally understanding that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the consequences. My phone rang. Dr. Running Bear's name on the screen. "Grace, I'm 5 minutes out with Dr. Sarah Chen from Fish and Wildlife. Federal trumps local. Dave Matthews can take his warrant and shove it." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you, Jim. Thank your grandmother. She set this up years ago. Made sure we had federal contacts who understood the real situation. Grace, you're not alone in this. You never were." I walked back to the door, Spirit still sleeping peacefully in my arms. "Dave, Michael, I suggest you leave now. Federal wildlife officials are en route, and they're going to be very interested in why local authorities are harassing a legitimate rehabilitation facility." "This is insane." Michael's voice cracked with frustration. "Grace, you're throwing your life away for a wild animal that doesn't even know you exist." I looked down at Spirit, who had opened his eyes at the sound of raised voices and was gazing up at me with complete trust. Then I looked through the window at Luna, who had relaxed her defensive posture, but remained vigilant, ready to protect her family. "You're wrong. Michael. He knows exactly who I am. They both do." I pressed my face against the cool glass of the window, and Luna moved closer, until only a few inches separated us. "I'm not throwing my life away. I'm finally living it." The sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the night Dr. Running Bear's truck, followed by an official Fish and Wildlife SUV. Help had arrived. But as I watched the federal agents step out of their vehicle, I realized something profound. I wasn't being rescued. I was being recognized. After 7 generations of hiding, of justifying, of apologizing for honoring connections that transcended human understanding, the covenant was finally being acknowledged by the outside world. "Welcome to the White Hawk Wildlife Sanctuary," I whispered to Spirit, who responded with the tiniest, most contented purr I'd ever heard. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this journey began, I knew with absolute certainty that we were going to win. 6 months later, autumn painted the Montana mountains in shades of gold and crimson that took my breath away every morning. I sat on my grandmother's porch, now watching Spirit chase falling leaves with the exuberant clumsiness of a healthy young bobcat. His injured leg had healed perfectly, leaving only the faintest limp that the veterinarian assured me would disappear completely as he grew stronger. Luna watched from her favorite spot beneath the old oak tree, her amber eyes following her son's every movement with the patient devotion of a mother who had almost lost everything. She'd grown comfortable with our strange little family arrangement, understanding somehow that Spirit needed both his wild heritage and human protection to thrive. "Looks like someone's feeling frisky this morning." Dr. Running Bear Jim, as I'd finally learned to call him, observed from the porch swing where he sat with his morning coffee. Our relationship had evolved naturally from professional to personal, built on shared purpose and mutual respect for the sacred work we did together. "He's getting ready for his first solo hunt," I replied, watching Spirit pounce on a particularly large maple leaf with fierce concentration. "Luna's been teaching him to stalk. Yesterday I caught him practicing on my slippers." Jim laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Your grandmother would have loved this, seeing you here, seeing the covenant continue." The official establishment of the White Hawk Wildlife Sanctuary had taken months of paperwork, federal inspections, and endless meetings with bureaucrats who struggled to understand how traditional native practices could coexist with modern wildlife management. But Dr. Sarah Chen from Fish and Wildlife had been our champion, recognizing that the covenant represented exactly the kind of innovative conservation approach the future required. "Traditional ecological knowledge," she'd called it in her official report. "Indigenous communities have been managing wildlife populations successfully for thousands of years. The White Hawk family's documented success with bobcat rehabilitation speaks to methodologies that deserve study and support, not suppression." The sanctuary now hosted a steady stream of visitors, veterinary students, wildlife biologists, tribal leaders from other nations interested in reestablishing their own covenant relationships. But my favorite visitors were the children from the local elementary school who came for monthly nature talks. Miss Grace, 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, had asked during last week's visit, "How do you know what the bobcats are thinking?" I'd knelt down to her level, remembering my grandmother doing the same for me decades ago. "Honey, you don't need to know what they're thinking. You just need to pay attention to what they're feeling. Animals talk with their whole bodies, not just their voices. Can you teach me? I can teach you to listen. The rest comes from your heart." The memory made me smile as I watched Spirit finally catch his leaf, only to have it disintegrate in his mouth. His expression of surprised disappointment was so comically human that both Jim and I burst out laughing. A truck turned into our driveway, and I recognized the familiar silhouette of my ex-husband behind the wheel. Michael had visited several times since the confrontation 6 months ago, each visit a little less antagonistic than the last, The legal validation of the sanctuary had forced him to confront the possibility that my delusions might actually be legitimate environmental work. "Grace," he called as he approached the porch, his voice carefully neutral. "Hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Of course not. Coffee's still hot if you want some." He climbed the porch steps slowly, his eyes tracking Spirit's movements with the wary fascination of someone still learning to see wild animals as something other than threats or trophies. "He's gotten big. 20 pounds now. Dr. Chen says he'll probably top out around 35 when he's fully grown." I gestured to the empty chair beside me. "What brings you up the mountain today?" Michael sat down heavily, and I noticed the shadows under his eyes, the lines of stress around his mouth. "I've been doing some thinking. About us. About what went wrong." Jim excused himself diplomatically, heading into the cabin to give us privacy. Michael watched him go with something that might have been envy. "Grace, I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the half-hearted attempts I've made before." "Michael, no. Let me say this. I spent our entire marriage trying to make you into someone you weren't. Someone smaller, quieter, more convenient. I told myself it was for your own good, that I was protecting you from judgment, from failure. But really, I was protecting myself from having to defend you, from having to grow big enough to deserve you." His words hung in the air between us, honest and painful. Spirit had abandoned his leaf hunting to investigate this new human, approaching Michael with the fearless curiosity of a creature raised without prejudice. "He's beautiful," Michael said softly as Spirit sniffed his boots. "I never really looked at him before. I was too busy being afraid." "Fear makes everything smaller," I replied, echoing something my grandmother used to say. "Love makes everything bigger. Is that why you do this? Love?" I considered the question while watching Luna rise from her resting spot to check on Spirit's interaction with our visitor. "I do this because it's who I am, who I've always been. Underneath all the layers of doubt and compromise, but yes, love is part of it. Love for the animals, for the land, for the connections that bind us all together." Michael reached out tentatively, letting Spirit sniff his fingers before gently stroking the young bobcat's head. Spirit's purr was audible from where I sat, a sound of pure contentment. "He trusts easily," Michael observed. "He was raised with trust. He doesn't know that humans and bobcats are supposed to be enemies." "Maybe that's the lesson," Michael said quietly. "Maybe we're all enemies until we choose not to be." It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard him say, and I felt a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago before fear and convention had built walls around his heart. "I'm not asking you to take me back," he continued. "I know I lost that right when I forced you to choose between your heritage and our marriage, but I want you to know that I see it now. What your grandmother was protecting, what you're continuing, it matters, Grace. It matters in ways I was too small to understand before." Spirit had settled down beside Michael's chair, a gesture of acceptance that spoke volumes. Luna, satisfied that her son was safe, returned to her shady spot, but kept one eye on our gathering. "Thank you for saying that," I told him. "It means more than you know." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Spirit explore the porch with the boundless energy of youth. Finally, Michael stood to leave. "Grace, there's one more thing. I'm seeing someone. Jennifer Martinez from the bank. I wanted you to hear it from me." I felt a surprising stab of, not jealousy exactly, but something like it. The final closing of a chapter I'd thought was already finished. "I'm happy for you, Michael. Really. You deserve someone who fits your world. And you deserve someone who fits yours." He glanced toward the cabin where Jim had disappeared. "Looks like you found him." After Michael left, Jim rejoined me on the porch, settling beside me on the swing with natural ease. "Everything okay?" "More than okay. I think we both finally got the closure we needed." The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard where Spirit continued his adventures. Luna had moved closer to the porch, drawn by some maternal instinct to be near her son as evening approached. "Jim, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you think my grandmother knew how all of this would turn out?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I think your grandmother understood something most people miss, that love isn't a finite resource, that caring for one creature doesn't diminish your capacity to care for others, that family isn't limited by species or blood or convention." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma Rodriguez, the little girl from last week's school visit. "Miss Grace, I saw a hurt bird today, and I listened with my heart like you taught me. I think it was saying, 'Help me.' My mom says we can bring it to you tomorrow." I showed Jim the message, and his smile was radiant. And so it continues. Another generation learning to listen. Another chance to build bridges instead of walls. As darkness fell, Luna called softly to Spirit, who reluctantly abandoned his explorations to curl up beside his mother beneath the oak tree. I watched them settle together, wild and free, but choosing to stay close to the safety we'd created here. My grandmother used to say that home isn't a place. It's where you're needed, I told Jim, leaning against his shoulder. I spent so many years trying to be needed somewhere else, by someone else. I never realized I was already home. And now, I looked at our strange little family, human and bobcat, traditional and modern, wild and domestic, all existing together in harmony. Now I know what she meant. This is where I belong. This is where I'm needed. This is home. Spirit's contented purr drifted across the yard, joined by Luna's answering rumble. Somewhere in the distance, other bobcats called to each other through the darkness, part of the extended family network that my presence here helped protect. As my great-grandmother used to say, I whispered into the peaceful night, love doesn't have species. Family doesn't need blood, and sometimes the most important conversations happen without words at all. Jim's hand found mine in the darkness, warm and steady and real, above us. Stars began to appear in the clear mountain sky, the same stars that had watched over 7 generations of White Hawk women, honoring their sacred promise to protect the wild things that trusted them. The covenant continued, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Sometimes the most profound journeys begin when we stop running from who we're meant to be. Grace Whitehawk's story reminds us that it's never too late to come home to ourselves, to honor the wisdom our grandparents tried to share, to embrace the connections we thought we'd outgrown, to choose love over fear even when the world calls us foolish. How many of us have spent decades trying to fit into someone else's definition of success, only to discover that our greatest gifts were the very things we were taught to hide? Grace found her purpose not in spite of her heritage, but because of it. She learned that family extends beyond blood, that trust transcends species, and that the most meaningful work often happens quietly, one heart at a time. In a world that increasingly feels divided and disconnected, the covenant reminds us that bridges can be built anywhere between generations, between cultures, between the wild and civilized parts of ourselves. Your grandmother's stories weren't just entertainment. They were invitations to remember who you really are. The question isn't whether you're too old to change, but whether you're brave enough to finally become yourself. What family wisdom have you been overlooking? Share in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of unexpected homecomings and late blooming courage.